Welcome back to Two Who's Review. I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
and today we'll be diving into the sixth Doctor story, Attack of the Cybermen.
Oh boy.
It's the second Cybermen story we'll be talking about as part of this podcast. The first one, Earthshock, is one of the most well-regarded Cybermen stories. This one, not so much.
Nope.
So before we go into any rankings or anything like that, I feel like it's a good idea to just have a look at where the show was at the time of this episode.
Yep.
The two stories prior to this, The Caves of Androzani, it's one of the most well-regarded stories of the show's entire run. It's one of the highest-rated regeneration stories of all time, and it's to this day it holds up, from what I can tell anyway, as a Doctor Who classic. The episode that follows it, The Twin Dilemma, is widely regarded as one of the worst stories that the show has ever done. It had, from what I can tell anyway, it had many moments of out-of-character stuff from the Doctor, particularly attempting to strangle a companion that he'd spent the last story trying desperately to save.
We'll get into that inconsistent characterization even in this story, but...
So the Twin Dilemma happens, and then that's the end of that season. The show takes a bit of a break. They decide to shake up how the show works. For instance, they move from 20-minute episodes to 40-minute episodes, and they make the stories episode length shorter as a result. So they go from the standard being about 4 episodes a story to now the standard is about 2. They also had an opportunity to look back at their initial characterization of the Sixth Doctor and change some things. I'm not sure if post-Regeneration Madness had been fully defined by this point in the show, but I think there is some kind of history to a Doctor being kind of out of it after a regeneration.
Yeah, definitely.
So they could have they had a very easy way to just go, I'm so sorry, Perry, my post-regeneration madness got to me, I'm better now. And they had a chance to tweak the Sixth Doctor almost entirely in order to win back a bit of public perception after what I'm told was not a very good first impression. So it's bizarre to me that this story seems to double down on how much the Doctor hates their companion. And what they've instead decided to do to win audiences back is throw a lot of nostalgia at the wall.
Oh, yeah. And I want to bring this up too. So the writing of this story is very odd as well. Now, I think I mentioned in the Earthshock episode, I was talking about Eric Saywood and the fact that he penned quite a few good scripts. And I said, oh, yeah, no, I remember he wrote Attack of the Cybermen, but then you looked it up and you said, oh, no, it says here he didn't. Well, the writer, and I'm saying that with quotation marks, Paula Moore, who wrote this, that was a pseudonym. No one, to this day, I can't believe I forgot about this, or at least most of the details of it, but I then looked it up on the TARDIS Wiki. According to the TARDIS Wiki, to this day, no one really knows who actually wrote that whole script. Now, there have been other moments.
Fascinating.
Yeah. There had been other moments in the show where people would use pseudonyms for a number of reasons. I think in The Brain of Morbius, the writer eventually just called himself Robert Bland for whatever reason. But no one really knows. So the name Paula was the name of I think it was Eric Saywood's girlfriend who he was seeing at the time. And according to him, there was a couple of story ideas that she came up with that were in it. So I think he admitted there were a couple of things there, but he said he mainly wrote the script. The biggest contention, however, comes between Eric Saywood and another guy whose name, for the life of me, I'm not remembering here. You know what, screw it, I'm going to look this up.
Okay.
But he was a fan consultant on the show, and he supposedly contributed quite a number of story ideas, but I think Eric Saywood said most of the script was written by him, so there's kind of there's a contention there, and again, no one really knows who wrote the story, so if it seems scattershot, that would make sense.
A story that was written by no one surely doesn't have that much consistency within it.
Yeah, it's a whole... it's a whole thing. I mean, like, sorry, I'm just getting this up on the
Okay.
computer
I might go
now.
through the timescales
Yeah,
information while
sure.
we do this. It's also interesting. I mentioned that they throw a lot of nostalgia in the wall in this episode. That's a
Mm.
tactic that seems to work nowadays to get certain types of people to look past a lot of problems in something and just focus on the stuff that they remember. And it seems to work here because for some reason, two people ranked this as a 10 out of 10 episode. Did we watch the same story?
What? Wait, no, no, wait, what? Sorry, say that again. I was just reading this thing. And incidentally, the guy, the fan consultant, his name was Ian Levine. So just putting that out there. Anyway, so just say that again because I felt I might have misheard something there.
Oh, if what you heard me say was two people ranked this as a 10 out of 10 story, then you heard me right the first time.
Um, no, just just no.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, that's not true.
there's clearly people who've gone, oh, well, it's Tomb of the Cyber. I remember Tomb of the Cybermen. That was good. That means this must be good. Oh yeah, that's what the logic is, because that mentality works these days as well. This episode has an average rating of 6.7, which I still think is high.
Yeah, I'd agree. That's being a bit generous.
It's very generous. Um, Good God. Plot 6.5,
Um,
maybe. What's happening? Sure.
uh, yeah, when stuff is happening, yeah. I mean, oh. Anyway, yeah, keep going.
Yep. 7.3 for acting. Why not?
Yeah, like there's nothing terrible. I mean, the Cryons are a little bit over the top, but they're fine. They work with the tone of the show, and they're fun enough.
Yeah. 6.8 for effects. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing they're doing that's like super ambitious, but I don't remember any really bad bit of special effects, even by
Yeah.
classic Who standards, really standing out to me. So yeah, they were fine enough.
6.7 replay value.
Well, that's the thing.
I feel like
And
you have
yeah,
something to say about this.
yeah, I'll say this now. Okay, so when I watched this story as a kid, because I have it on DVD, I only ever watched the second part, like after the first time I watched it. Like I saw the whole thing as a kid, but after that I'd only watched the second part. The reason for that was because that was a consistent pattern of what I used to do with movies and TV shows that I really enjoyed, in that I would only start watching a movie, for instance, from when I started to really enjoy it. So with Lord of the Rings and the Two Towers, for example, because I had a massive Lord of the Rings phase as a kid, I only would start watching the movie from they're taking the hobbits to Isengard. So that's just a example of how this sort of thing works. But it happened with Attack of the Cybermen, and so when I was watching it again for this podcast, I thought, well, obviously I'm going to have to watch the whole thing, and there might be, who knows, Nick? There may be some hidden gems, or there may be something interesting in the first episode. I now realize that the reason why I only watched the second episode, like there's a very good reason why I only watched the second episode, and it's because the first episode is not good for quite a number of reasons, and as as many problems as I have with the story overall, the second episode for me way better than the first, way more interesting. Don't get me wrong, it's not great. There are still probably some problems, and even more problems that I'll discover when discussing this with you, Cuff. But um,
Mm.
considerably better than the first, because the first is
Oh,
like
yeah.
there's just nothing. There's like nothing happening, and the only bits that are memorable in it are these really weird, bizarre, unpleasant bits of characterization with the Doctor. And we'll get into this in more detail, but like the creative decisions behind his characterization, I don't know
I
what they
don't
were
understand it.
thinking. They
It
just it was dumb. It was
it's
pointless.
so jarring.
That
Uh,
first episode is just so bad.
it's yeah.
I I'm tempted to say, I'm honestly tempted to say that it's almost completely pointless because there is nothing interesting that happens in that episode until the very end with the cliffhanger when you've got Cybermen in the TARDIS. That's your opening of the episode, man. That's what you do.
Mm.
Cybermen in the TARDIS, that's interesting. We haven't really seen that, to this extent before. That's cool. Let's start there. In fact, I'm going to go so far as to say that all of the character setups in that first episode, you could have taken care of them in 10, maximum 15 minutes. You could have taken that 15 minutes, stuck it to the beginning of episode 2, and had a nice 1 hour special. May not have been brilliant, but it would have been better than what we got in the overall package here. So, sweet Jesus, this is just not... It is not a good first part. Let's just get that out of the way.
14 out of 54 people say this story requires a previous. I'm surprised the number's that low, considering how much this episode loves to call back to previous stories. I feel like maybe that number should be 100% of people. Like, I've seen Tomb of the Cybermen years and years and years ago, and also the episode Lytton was in, I'd seen that one as well. But I remember, like, nothing from them. Again, it was that long ago. So for a lot of this, I was just so lost. I was like, okay, Lytton, who's this guy? Do they know him? What? Huh? I'm so confused. And then, like, in the second half when they're going into more... They do a bit of a better job explaining a lot of the Cybermen stuff in part 2, so that you don't really have to have seen Tomb of the Cybermen. But, like, the whole episode is hinging around undoing a previous tragedy that we've seen on screen before in the 10th Planet. So... you kind of feel like you have to do a good job explaining your backstory for people who haven't seen that. Otherwise, this episode is even worse. They do an all right job, but for a lot of it, I was quite lost.
It was, and again, there's so much nostalgia bait in it. It's like the junkyard that they materialize in, that's the junkyard that the TARDIS was in The Unearthly Child, for example.
Any particular reason they chose to do that? Any
no
narrative reason behind it? Any tone and reason behind it? No. Is it just something you threw in there to say, oh look, we still remember what the show used to be, we care about it? No, you're just doing something that has already been done, and you're using that to mask the fact that you don't know what you're doing now.
It's why, there's a bunch of other stuff, bits of dialogue between Perry and the Doctor. It's like, oh, Doctor, you've confused me for all these old companions. Remember Zoe? Remember Victoria? Remember the terrible Zodin? That one line that they mentioned in the in the Five Doctors, but is a character that we never actually see in the whole show. Remember that? That's here too, because reasons. It's so dumb. It's basically that whole first episode. I feel is like just an excuse to sort of push in this really forced bits of sort of nostalgia and to have them running around a sewer. Like, that's it. That's all that happens in this episode. That and a couple of, again, really unpleasant, uncharacteristic moments of the Doctor being a vicious, nasty little shit. That's basically it.
We'll jump into that in a bit. There's a couple of bit more moments of housekeeping we've got to do first. This is the third lowest rated overall story from the Sixth Doctor era. The lowest is obviously the Twin Dilemma. The third lowest rated Sixth Doctor story. The lowest is the Twin Dilemma. The one that comes in the middle is Time Lash.
Oh yeah, no, I think I have seen Time Lash, and I think when I saw it was years ago, so it didn't bother me that much. But yes, from what I've heard, yeah, it's a terrible story. So
something else to point out, and I think this is quite funny. So Caves of Androzani is listed under Sixth Doctor stories, despite really being a Fifth Doctor story, because the Sixth Doctor does appear at the end of it, so that's why they've done it. Caves of Androzani has a 9.3. The highest rated actual Sixth Doctor story is more than a full point lower than that.
Which one is it?
It's Vengeance on Varos at 8.2.
From Trial of a Time Lord. Yeah, that makes sense. I remember that actually being quite a good episode. But
but I find it so interesting that there's just a so sharp a drop between what is supposedly the highest rated Sixth Doctor story there is in a Sixth Doctor story, and then the actual highest rated Sixth Doctor. Like if it was like a 9.0 or an 8.9, that'd be fine. But it's a 9.3 down to an 8.2.
Yeah, which is...
It's a pretty noticeable drop in quality.
Yeah, it is. It really, really is.
All right, let's read out this synopsis so that people who've been hearing us complain, who haven't quite seen the story, have a slight better idea what we're talking about. The TARDIS is lured to Earth in 1985 by a distress call sent by Lytton, who has made contact with a group of Cybermen based in London's sewers. The Doctor and Perry are then captured and forced to take Lytton and the Cybermen in the TARDIS to the Cybermen's home planet, Telos. The Cybermen have stolen a time vessel from another race and plan to change history by crashing Halley's Comet into Earth and obliterating it before it can bring about the demise of their original homeworld, Mondas, in 1986. Lytton, however, is a double agent employed by the Cryons, a species native to Talos. His mission is to capture the stolen time vessel, but he fails and is partially converted into a Cyberman. The Doctor is unable to save him, but manages to kill the Cyber Controller. The Cryon leader, Flast, sacrifices her own life, and a huge explosion completely destroys the tombs. So you notice how at the start of this synopsis, they were talking about the Cybermen in the sewers? That first sentence of that full synopsis is episode 1.
Yeah, and by the way,
the rest of it is episode 2.
For the folks listening at home, if that sounded like quite a confusing plot description, you'd be right. Good luck watching this episode, because it was confusing.
I mentioned that they tried to use some nostalgia baiting to try and win back audiences. That is very, very clear in the fact that they pull from the majority of the most well-known Cyberman stories, and also a Dalek story, as it turns out, which is what Lytton is from, to try and, especially considering this is the first episode back, like, they knew what they were trying to do. This is it's blatantly audience baiting. It's showing the audience a nice picture of 10th planet and Tomb of the Cybermen box art, and just going, You remember that?
Remember this?
Remember that shit? Ah, boy.
Just oh god, this.
Yeah. So, but the first episode, it's comprised of two things. One, a criminal gang trying to break into a bank or something through a sewer. And
they're trying to do a diamond heist through the sewer.
Yeah, and two, the Doctor being really, really harshly and like indiscriminately mean towards his companion Perry, who
and everybody
I might
else,
point
basically.
out mainly to Perry, who I might point out again, the last time he died, it was in an attempt to save her, right? Like, the whole of Caves of Androzani is about saving Perry, Doctor be damned, right? That's what that story's about? Yep. So to go from that to then being like, I'm watching it and going, Doctor, I genuinely don't know why you keep Perry around. You clearly dislike her. Yep. It's so blatant that you hate her. Why?
We know that.
Why are you choosing to keep her?
We know that he's got a problem with her because of what happened in the Twin Dilemma. There's a bit in this episode where Perry's like, "Oh, I'm a bit worried about you, Doctor. You seem kind of unstable. What's going on?"
Understandably,
like, unstable. And then he just goes, "Oh, don't worry, Perry. I won't hurt you. I promise." Well, you know what, Doc? If I was trapped in a gigantic spaceship with a guy who tried to strangle me recently, I'd be pretty fucking concerned.
That scene is so bizarre to me, because again, they had the opportunity to chalk it up to post-regeneration madness. They had that opportunity on a platter. And then, instead, to go, you seem a bit unstable, and the Doctor going, no, I'm not unstable, I'm not unstable, I'm not unstable, and having him be right. Like, that scene makes it explicitly clear it wasn't a post-regeneration thing. This is who the Doctor is now. Enjoy!
Well, that's the thing, though. Sorry, go ahead.
I've always heard before this that the Sixth Doctor was out of character for a lot of his run. And... yeah.
And here's the thing, though, with that. With the Doctor's inconsistent characterization, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. But one of the curious things is, I feel like for this story specifically, that really unpleasant bit of characterization is actually only really pleasant in the present, is only really present in the first episode. In the second episode, they basically get rid of it. The Doctor is being much more like the Doctor again in the second episode. Yeah, he's being a bit like an arrogant asshole, but that's fine. And those little moments where he's got sort of little bits of dialogue where he's being like a really egotistical jerk, but like not being a monster, those moments are good. I like them. I think it's doing something interesting. It's doing something fresh. I actually like the bit, I think in the Twin Dilemma where he's looking at his reflection after a January and he's like, I have a noble brow. Or when he's talking about the terrible Zod, and he's like, they don't make villains like her anymore. A woman of, ingenuity and cunning guile. Those little bits, that's fine. I like the fact that they're making him a bit of an arrogant asshole, but they take it way too far in that first episode, and again, you know that, because in the second episode, it's basically gone. The Doctor is being much more like the actual Doctor that we've come to know and love, and it's really good. He's being compassionate, he's being caring. I love the bit where he's like, oh yeah, this Time Lords probably will send like an agent to fix the situation, and Flash is like, perhaps their agent is already at work, and he's like, no, not me, you've manipulated me into this situation, it would have been better if I had known what was going on. And then she said, oh, you're a Time Lord, and he's like, yes, and at the moment, a rather angry one. That's fine. That works well. It's doing something a bit different, doing something interesting, and the Doctor is being the Doctor. This is why I say that first episode feels so pointless, because there's none of that nasty characterization being carried over here. So if they did that, if they took that characterization of the Doctor being, a bit of an arrogant jerk, but not a monster, and mapped that onto the first episode, that at least would have made the first episode a bit better, but that's not what we got here. We got the Doctor, when they capture, I think it's Payne, the guy who's the undercover cop, there's a bit where he's just like, yep, just shoot him. It doesn't matter, just shoot him. And then when Payne says, you'll get 30 years for that, the Doctor literally says, that's a handful of heartbeats for a Time Lord. And let's be very, very clear about this. This is not the same thing as when we see Christopher Eccleston being ruthless, because then we know that there's a backstory there. We know that this is a very careful, a very considered piece of writing. We know that the Doctor's been traumatized. We know he's been through the Time War. We know that he has these sort of monstrous qualities inside him that he's wrestling with, and even then we still have a lot of compassion. Here, it's so clear to me that the only reason they made the Doctor like this was in some really shitty, lazy attempt to make the Doctor more edgy for like a new audience, because they knew that that viewership had, maybe dropped a bit over the last few years, but it's so clear that this was a lazy, poorly considered attempt to make the Doctor more edgy, and the results, honestly, are pretty catastrophic.
I'm reminded of the moment in Bad Wolf when Ninth Doctor points a gun at someone, and they go, don't shoot, and he just gives them the gun and goes, well, don't be an idiot, I was never going to shoot, obviously. And then contrasting with this, where he's like, yeah, go on, Perry, kill this guy. Just kill the guy. And there's none of that same, there's none of that same empathy behind the eye. There's none of that, it's not the kind of carefully considered aggression that other Doctors might use to get what they want. And especially off the back of the first half of the episode, there is a real sense of, oh, is this who you are now?
Yeah. He literally says, I'm as stable as you'll ever see me. So
yeah, well, that scene especially, I'm looking at it from the perspective of the writer's room, and I'm looking at them going, okay, so there was some backlash surrounding how the Doctor was characterized in Twin Dilemma. The people didn't like how aggressive it was, people thought he was a bit too egotistical, people thought he wasn't really treating his companion very well.
Yeah.
But they're all wrong, and we're going to take some time out of this episode to tell the audience how wrong they were through Perry. And we're going to have him essentially say, this is who I am, deal with it, let's move on. And that kind of mentality is always bad. Like, I hate when writers go, the audience is wrong. And sometimes they are. Sometimes an audience is wrong.
Yeah.
But there are moments. Like, for example, I know the writer of Fear Her, that bad Series 2 episode, he many times has said, no, that episode's awesome. You guys are wrong about that. And to me, when a writer can't handle criticism, that
Mm,
always sets off alarm bells in my head.
yeah. And the fact is, because the thing is, I'm fine with, an artist of any stripe being, really dedicated to their vision and not giving a damn, what other people think and just doing what they want to do. That's fine.
But only
But
when it's
like,
justified.
yeah, there's a difference, and especially on a TV show, which is quite a collaborative thing, and you are the stewards of this story. And especially with a show like Doctor Who, which again, I've said this before, it's a standard, um, you know, conventionally plotted story. The plot's the most important thing. I don't even mind even in that space if you want to do something different and interesting, but if you're going to do that, you better have the talent to pull it off, and you better have the humility to stand back and say, well, maybe that was just a bit of blind a blind alleyway of development that just didn't really work, and yes, maybe it probably was my fault. Um, you can't have the attitude that I think the writers had here. And honestly, I don't know who wrote this story, and at the end of the day, I don't care. I don't really care who wrote this story. All I know is that the second episode was pretty good. I enjoyed it quite a bit. First episode, fucking awful. And I
Mm-hmm.
just and it just reminds me again, and I'm sure I've mentioned this before, that this is why it's important not to strap your nostalgia goggles on too hard because it'll constrict the blood flow to your head. But
Mm.
like and I know maybe this is kind of like a cheap shot because I know that the consensus is, yeah, Colin Baker's Era is like the lowest rated and people don't like it, but like it's still important to point out this is why nostalgia goggles can be such a problem. Because this is, very simply, not a good story. This is bad writing. If Chibnall had tried to pull stunts like this, people would be losing their minds. People would be frothing at their mouths. They'd be chomping at the bit. They'd be saying, "Oh, God, what the fuck has Chibnall done? He's ruined it. He's made the character, the Doctor, terrible. What's happening here?" No, the problem is that it's in the classic series, and we need to be honest about it, okay? Because I have complained before about problems with the characterization of the Doctor and how inconsistent it is, both with the Sea Devils, which again, I got very bitter about sort of how it didn't stick the landing with the ending and the Doctor's characterization, but also especially with Legend of the Sea Devils. The fact that you had the Doctor basically fucking off, in time and space, leaving Dan alone for 15 minutes of the episode. I thought, yeah, that's actually kind of a very undoctorish thing to do. Well, if I'm going to criticize those episodes for it, then by God, I need to criticize this episode for it because it is just the presence of the laziness and the weird fixation of, oh, we're taking risks, we're doing something edgy, we're the edgy people, man,
It's
we're
the
gonna make this
80s
show
now,
new.
man.
Yeah, it's the 80s. Yeah, people don't want their Doctor good and decent and heroic. That's over. This is Thatcher's England, guys. Society doesn't exist anymore. We're gonna do something super edgy and cool and new and different, and you're gonna sit there and you're gonna take it because you're the audience and we're the writers and fuck off. Like, and I apologize to you, Cuff, and to the audience at home. I honestly didn't anticipate I'd get that angry about this episode, but
I just
like,
I just love how even in
good
this rant
God.
about I just love how in this rant about the Sixth Doctor being poorly characterized, you still somehow found a way to get a shot at Thatcher in. That's
It just,
impressive.
it's so bad. It's so bad. It just doesn't. And again, and we will get to this later on, but I actually quite like the second episode. As I said, there's a reason why I only watched that episode, because at least with that episode things are happening, at least the plot is going, and the even some of the edgier risks they take, like with the ending, which is a very downbeat ending in which all of the side characters die. Even then, I actually kind of admire it. I admire the fact that they had that creative vision and went and pushed it that far. The fact that the message is, the Doctor literally says, I don't think I've quite misjudged somebody quite as much as I did Lytton. The fact that they really sort of stuck with that sort of thematic expression, I can really admire it. Yes, it's very bitter, but I thought, okay, I can accept that. At least they're trying to do something, and at least there's a pathos here. At least the Doctor's realizing, oh, you know how I've been an asshole for like the last 90 minutes? Actually, that was probably not a very good idea. And again, as I said, it's as if the first episode didn't happen because the second episode is the Doctor actually being the Doctor. He is being more compassionate. He is being more himself, and it all just makes more sense. So they clearly show they can do something with edgier themes, but like they're not even trying to do something with it. So,
So can
God,
I ask? So I haven't seen Resurrection of the Daleks in a while, and I certainly haven't seen it since I saw Attack of the Cybermen. But does rewatching Resurrection of the Daleks with the knowledge that Lytton is a Cryon double agent, does that still make that story make sense?
do you mean
Or is this
story? Do you mean?
more for the previous story? Like with the knowledge that Lytton is working for the Cryons, does Resurrection of the Daleks still make sense as a result, or have they changed? Have they retconned Lytton's character in a way that makes no sense to how he was characterized in the past?
Yeah, no, that second one, I would say, because I think
Oh, good. That's what I thought it
because
was.
he yeah, there's no really, I think, sense of pathos in Resurrection for him. He's just this guy working for the Daleks. I mean, the fact that you have these English bobbies who are the villains of this story, that again, that's just another callback to Resurrection because that episode opens rather infamously with English policemen gunning down civilians in the street. So,
I
yeah.
forgot about that.
So, it just it's not it really isn't all that consistent. It's just this kind of twist to get the Doctor to be more empathetic, which I'm not even against that, but like it just doesn't work. So I think it would be useful just to kind of take it back maybe to the beginning of this episode and just kind of try and run through beat by beat this story and what the problems were with it, because there's a lot to talk about.
God, I'll try, but Jesus Christ, a lot of this bored me.
Yeah, I'll do.
I'll be honest. We mentioned last week that we had a bit of a recording gap. We were scheduled to record these, maybe 4-5 weeks ago. I want to say. And at that time, I watched this episode, and I had the option over the last couple days to rewatch this episode, and I chose not to. And I chose to rewatch Legend of the Sea Devils before we reviewed that. So that should tell you what my opinion of this episode is.
Well, I have watched it 3 times in the last few weeks.
Oh, and no. Don't say that. Don't tell me that I've been... I'm dropping the ball. You're making me look bad in front of... You're making me look bad in front of the kids. You always do this.
No, here's the thing, though. The reason why I kept watching it, yes, it was partially in preparation for the podcast, but the biggest reason why was because the plot of the first episode is still very confusing. Now, again, I've watched this story 3 times, and I still can't explain to you what the whole thing with the signal is. I cannot... Like, it's like there's a signal, but there's a smaller signal that's being masked by the big signal, and the big signal doesn't want to be discovered, so it's got the little signals, and the Doctor finds the signal, and I'm saying signal way too many times at the moment, but you know what I mean. I still can't fucking tell you what that's meant to be about. And here's the thing.
No, shut up. It's a MacGuffin. That's all it is. Shut up. It gets the Doctor where it needs to go, and that's all it needs to do. It doesn't have to make sense. It just has to function with the story.
And here's the thing. I sometimes get concerned when I watch TV shows and stuff that maybe I don't understand the plot terribly, and I often have to kind of sit back and say, well, Nick, was the plot really unclear there, or were you just not paying attention or something? I am happy to say, though, while doing this podcast, I have always been in the right. When the plot is confusing, it's because the plot is confusing. This has been proved with Legend of the Sea Devils. This has definitely been proved with this episode, and it's been proved by comparison with Aliens in London World War III. So I'll give you an example. When in World War III, the bit where Mickey is trying to find a missile to launch at Parliament at number 10, there was a moment where I thought, oh wait a minute, didn't he try to get like codes to the nuke? So if it was a nuclear missile, wouldn't it have like obliterated half of London or something? But then I thought in the back of my mind, no, Nick, I'm sure if there was like a massive plot hole like that, you would have noticed it by now. So I then went back and watched it and then just deliberately went onto the timestamps of that little moment to see what it was. And
Yeah.
I was right. They didn't use nukes. The doctor, like Mickey says, oh, I can't get to the nukes, you need another password for it. And the doctor specifically says we won't need them, we just need a regular missile. So it's
Yeah.
like, and this isn't true with every type of story, but with the story the Doctor's trying to tell, which, standard plot, where the plot is the most important thing, in those stories, the good versions of those stories, when they're done well, you don't have to be constantly scrupulously looking for, oh, well, did this plot point exist? Because they already take care of that for you. Compare that to Attack of the Cybermen. Again, I've watched it 3 times, and I still can't explain to you what the signal means or what it's about. And as much as I want to say maybe that's just me, I'm pretty damn sure it's not. I'm pretty damn sure it's just because the writing is shoddy. That's exactly what the problem is here.
Yeah. Well, it's calling out to the cyber ships on Telos.
And that gets the Cybermen there, but like, oh god.
But so a year from now in this timeline, Mondas is going to be destroyed. So the Cybermen have discovered time travel because on Mondas they're clearly less advanced than they are here.
And they,
but if they've been sealed on Telos, they must have had time travel long before this. So how did they? What is the timeline? What's going on with the Cybermen? How do they have time travel? When did they have time travel? When did they go to Telos?
Well,
why can't they just blow up? Why can't they just destroy Earth another way so that Mondas can survive?
They even say the Flash, the leader of the Cryons, says that yeah, they have the technology for time travel, but they don't understand how to use it, which is why they're taking this massive risk and trying to alter the timeline. Which as the Doctor points out in Remembrance of the Daleks, not even the Daleks would try to do something that crazy. So it's just. By the way, not that we ever see this time ship, and I get that they probably did that for budget constraints.
Oh no, yeah.
But like, it's just apparently, again, as you say, it's kind of a MacGuffin. It's just a thing that's there.
Well, it's a line that they've thrown in as an excuse to call back to the 10th planet,
and to
they must have realized, whoever wrote this must have realized. So I've written this so that the Cybermen are trying to blow up Earth, but I haven't figured out why. Oh, God, let me just scroll back through the Cybermen archive. So, hang on. The 10th planet takes place in 1986?
That's almost now.
What? It's 1985 now! If I call back to this now, people will say I'm a genius and not a hack.
And I'll put in Halley's Comet just as, another thing. That works.
Halley's Comet was going around about that time, right? Like, it was about...
Well, but here's the thing, though. Yes, these are all definitely concerns with the writing to point out. But again... For me, the second episode is significantly better than the first, partly because...
Oh, no, absolutely. Like, with the amount of times they rely on calling back to previous episodes, I'm surprised it's not more of a train wreck.
It's quite good. I feel like the plot is, ironically, it's more memorable because there's way more stuff happening in it, but it's, oddly enough, far less confusing than the first episode. Like, I understand what's happening. They're on Mondas. They're on Telos, excuse me. They're trying to escape. Doctor's captured. Helping Flash to escape. Guys are trying to get to the ship, and it all, like, it makes sense.
I do quite like that a significant amount of this story is taken up by the subplot of the two Cybermen prisoners trying to get onto the warship. And Lytton joins them, and it's about 20 to 30 minutes of the overall story that's taken up by this plot, and then they get there and they're unceremoniously gunned down by a Cyberman, and it all meant nothing.
Which, again, as I said, is
not an amazing C plot that didn't impact the story in any way. As
I said,
so don't waste my time with
as kind
that.
of slapdash and bitter as it was, that element I didn't mind so much because it kind of feeds into, again, the theme of the Doctor misjudging people, which they should have really had from the get-go and not just in episode 2.
If they had then at the end of the episode had some kind of reconciliation with Perry about, like, on the back of misjudging Lytton, he then goes, okay, you know what? I've
Mm,
been unfair to you as well, Perry. I'm going to be better.
yeah,
I'd agree with
but they
you.
don't.
But as it stands, it serves as a resolution to a character that wasn't set up that way to
Mm,
begin with, and in order to justify it, they gave us a C plot that also added nothing to
it
the
it
overall story, and ends literally in
yeah
5 seconds when
yeah
both of their main characters who are
yeah.
important there get shot, and it doesn't impact what the Doctor's
Mm,
doing. That jump ship was in no way important to his
mm-hmm,
solution. It's not part of what the
yeah
Cryons are trying to do. It is a completely
yeah.
incidental thing. And you mentioned that everything in episode 1 can be
Mm.
done in 10 minutes. Well, trimming the fat from episode 2, you probably wouldn't even get to 40 minutes total with this story.
Yeah, I guess that makes
It's
sense.
it's very bare
Mm,
bones in what its actual
mm,
A plot is, despite how much they're
yeah.
overstuffing it. It's almost a mystery how this episode manages to be too much
Yeah.
and not enough at the
And
same
it's so
time.
strange, but when you look at again the shifts in sort of characterization between and other elements between episodes 1 and 2, it's almost like they filmed that first episode, they realized, oh, I think we've fucked up here, and then they did some really quick damage control in the second episode, which is why the ending seems so jarring and so sudden. Where it's like, oh, we've got to keep the bitter tone, but we've got to make the Doctor a little bit nicer, so we'll make him not a horrendous sociopath, and we'll have him regret his judgment of Lytton, and then that'll fix it.
Mm.
Sure, God.
Also, how many Cyberman big bosses were there in
Ah,
this?
that's
All of them,
That's the
right?
thing. And I think I mentioned this before when we talked about Attack of the Cybermen. Eric Saywood himself, and again, he likely wrote a good chunk of this story. He even said himself that one of the big problems he had with this story is there were too many talking heads. There was the cyber leader, cyber lieutenant, and cyber controller, and he said he shouldn't have put all three of them there. Um,
Yeah, you only
yep.
need one, and none of them did an awful lot in this
No,
story
I mean, of
anyway.
all of them, I think the cyber controller might have been the most interesting, but like even then, they barely.
He was the fat one, right?
Yeah, the one with a weird egg head. Like, you know,
How does that happen? How do you get
I
a
don't even
fat
know.
Cyberman? Surely, isn't the point that they're all
Hmm.
uniform and they're all the same? How does do they eat?
Yeah,
What's going
who
on?
knows?
Why did that happen?
It's just
Does cyber armor expand? Is it one size fits all, but it's like spandex where it can sort of morph to fit the body shape? What? It's a very minute part of the episode to be stuck on, but I
yeah.
just saw that and went, that's not what the
I think
Cybermen
I
are about.
I
What are
think
you
I even
talking
remember
about?
when I first watched the episode when I got it on DVD as a kid. I even thought, yeah, that's a little odd. That they did that. I mean, I was willing to forgive it, but like it is strange. Oh, also something else which I need to bring up a correction to something, and I said when we did Earthshock, I said something to the effect of, "Oh yeah, I can't really think of many stories or really any stories in the classic series where the conversion element is really emphasized." Well, I was completely wrong because the conversion element it's not a massive part of this episode, but it's definitely there. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Litton's in mid
yeah,
conversion and then dies, and it
yeah.
doesn't mean anything.
Um, so I was,
There's
mm,
a lot of that. There's a lot of that in this story about things getting
yeah.
set up and then it turns out they don't mean anything at all. Um, I I like the
Yeah,
Cryons in
they're probably
this.
one of the best parts of the episode, and partly because it is kind of a commentary on genocide. And incidentally, this is what I meant when I said that even in this lackluster story, they still managed to put in some, at least an attempt at pretty good political commentary when they're talking about how, um, the Cryons were basically, you know, almost genocided out of existence, and so now I'm going to be
Uh
able to
huh.
turn around to any sort of who nays Doctor Who naysayers, and I'm going to be able to turn around and say, "Oh, by the way, guys, remember that moment in this mediocre Doctor Who episode where they're clearly taking a stand against genocide? Yeah, that's not political at all. Like, what? What? Anyway, that's just a
I feel like even no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, people will mostly agree that
yeah.
genocide is bad. It's just that people will have different definitions on what a genocide is.
um,
The one thing I will say is it's interesting that these the way they describe the
Mm,
cryons is they need their internal body temperature to be
yeah,
well below freezing, otherwise they basically
yeah,
instantly melt. And we do see that when the cryon starts to like
yeah,
steam after being
yeah.
shot, basically. Um, that's not to mention the amount of times that either they were
Mm,
outside of a place that there were a lot of situations where the cryons and other human, it was Perry or
mm,
the Doctor was standing somewhere, and neither the human characters were like visibly affected by
mm,
the cold, or the cryons are visibly affected by the heat. So it's like for those things they kind of
mm.
forgot about it. But also there's a bit where a cryon gets shot with a thing and starts
Yeah,
steaming and
yeah.
boiling
Basically
essentially,
dissolves.
and the other cryons are like, you know, they're either grieving
Mm,
or like comforting that cryon, and they're actively
mm.
touching her.
Yeah.
Surely there'd be residual heat from
And
that.
another.
Stay away. If
Mm,
heat kills you
mm.
immediately and there is this thing that's boiling, don't touch
And
it.
this is all. There's also another thing, and this may be a nitpick, but like when they're firing which are clearly the same guns that the Cybermen are using, wouldn't there be like
Yeah.
residual heat from those as well? Would they really be able to touch those weapons? And again, maybe
Uh,
I'm.
yeah. That to me is like more of a thing I can
Mm,
explain away by saying it's just a
yeah.
sci-fi gun. The actual like
Go. Yeah.
physical rules of body
Yeah.
temperature and basic
Mm,
campfire logic will dictate that you shouldn't get near something that's boiling if you that also die to the heat. Um, but I do like the solution of the like the flash
mm,
powder, whatever it is, the really explosive
yeah.
material that
Mm.
Flask uses to
Oh
wipe
yeah,
out a
the
bunch of the
Bastille. Yeah,
Cybermen.
that's really
I
cool.
do like that. Yeah, is that there is a scene before that where the doctor says no, you can't do
Mm,
that. Let me do it, and then she goes no, it's up.
mm.
I have to do this. There is there an exchange like that? Because I was worried it'd be another situation of the doctor being in a situation where they would volunteer their own life, and then just someone else goes, "No, not me," and then they go, "Okay," but there was a legitimate
Yeah, I
reason
think. Yeah, I think
why it
there
had to be
was. I think.
flasked. Yeah,
I don't know, like Flast, I think, said that she'd sort of accepted her fate and she just wants to destroy the Cybermen. Like she says, if there's anything I could do to obstruct or disrupt their course, I certainly would. So, yeah, I think that makes sense. It's just
yeah,
sort of getting back to the sort of the inconsistencies of the plot and even theme. So we know it's established in this world that the Cryons, before we discover that they're there, it's established that they've been they've had a genocide against them and they've been wiped out.
yeah,
Now, like that's an awful thing to happen, but like you would expect, oh, there's still some of them still alive. Could the Doctor not maybe try to save some of them? Or I mean, I get that they
yeah.
probably maybe not may not be able to exist in the TARDIS because it's above 0 degrees, but I think you'd think the Doctor would have done something to try and save them, but he doesn't. He just kind of leaves, and the only remote.
Well, they couldn't they couldn't show the Doctor doing that because they'd wasted all their time on a C plot that went nowhere.
And like the only I'm pretty sure the only commentary at all that we get on that issue is Lytton says something to the effect of, "Oh yeah, um, yes, the Cryons are dead. It's just like it's just part of the web of time or something." I'm like, what? There was no way you could have tried to save these people from their demise. I mean, because again, the Doctor knows that Flast is in there with the Bastille and the Sonic Lance. He literally says this place could go up at any moment. But then there's a bit where one of the other Cryons says, we shall survive. But the Doctor just doesn't do anything. So did he like did he just think, oh, they're yeah, they won't survive, but whatever, because the Cybermen are gonna die too? Or did he just forget? Or did the writers just forget? Or like, how does that make sense?
All of the above.
Sorry, say again.
All of the above. All of those answers you gave
Oh
are the reason
God.
why. There's no point in trying to wrap our head around this episode. This is clearly a story where they just wanted things to happen and have stuff be vaguely recognizable, and that's what they
And
did. And they didn't put a lot of thought into how to string it all together, or what elements to focus on more than others, or which characters should be in character and which characters shouldn't be in character, and anything about any sort of narrative cohesion between the stories that they're attempting to call back to. they took the throw everything at the
Yeah,
wall
and see
approach,
what would stick, and it turns
and it
out
didn't,
not very much.
and nothing stuck.
And it's funny, but I think I mentioned at the beginning that, there's nothing terribly bad with the special effects of this episode, but I honestly feel like there's almost moments where they were trying to fit a plot around some of the special effects, because you had, you know, Flast boiling alive when she's thrown out into the hallway. You got the other Cryon who basically dissolves. You got the cyber controller having green fluid just spurting everywhere when Lytton stabs him to death. Um, and that all looks pretty cool, and those little moments are kind of enjoyable, but like, good God, the plot doesn't justify any of it. They're just kind of these kind of okay special effects shots that are just there in a story that makes no sense, has barely any kind of emotionally satisfying moments. Again, the Cryons are the best bit in this whole story, and they don't even really do that much with them. Certainly not as much as I think they should be doing. Um, and it's all just sort of coalescing in this horrifying, rotting casserole of muddled storytelling, nostalgia bait, and a desperate, painfully desperate need to do something different and edgy. And overall, I think I honestly think it's safe to say, Cuff, and I'm sure you'll agree with me. This is probably by a considerable degree the worst classic story we've looked at in this whole podcast.
I'll go better. I think this is worse than Legend of the Sea Devils. I
Um.
I dislike I dislike most of this. There's very little about this that actually saves this episode. You mentioned there's moments here and there. Well, that's true, but when those moments happen because of stuff that doesn't make sense and isn't, well placed in the episode, I can't really enjoy those moments all that well. I like Perry in this, at least. I like that she's willing to call out the Doctor occasionally, and she keeps questioning him, which makes her the voice of reason. I agree with. So I like her, but there's not a lot else I like about this story.
There's one tiny little thing I do want to mention about that. So Nicola Bryant's performance, her American accent isn't terribly convincing. And that kind of makes sense because I've seen her in Blackadder's Christmas Carol, for example, and she's doing this quite a posh English accent, and it sounds much more natural than what she does with Perry. But I do find it kind of funny that there are a number of moments where she says very British sounding phrases. I think there's a bit where she says, "Oh, come off it, Doctor," which is a very British thing, and to hear it being said by someone with an American accent seems a bit jarring to me, especially given that there's a bit where Perry says, "Oh, I think she said, I've never been to London," so I'm like, not sure what's going on there, but yeah, that's just a little kind of quirk that I found with it that made me laugh a little. But generally, yeah.
And so you say that, I genuinely didn't know Nicola Bryant was an American.
Yeah, no, she's British.
She had me fooled.
I don't know whether it's because maybe I already knew that, she was British, and
Maybe.
I've seen quite a bit of the classic series, but there are just moments where the accent sort of slips for me. But as you say, no, her performance generally pretty good, able to evoke a sense of pathos. Certainly, I'd say her and the Cryons are the most sympathetic characters in this whole story.
Easily.
And you're with Perry for a longer period of time, so yeah, I mean, the fact that you, as you say, you frame her as this sort of the voice of reason in this story, that makes sense. There's that good bit where she's like, wait, how do you know that was the Doctor? I arrived with 3 men. So, at least with her that, she's doing something. She's doing something that kind of impacts her characterization and the plot, which is more, I think you can probably say, for most of the characters here. Again, I've got no fucking clue what they were doing with that Diamond Heist setup. Like, why was that there?
Perry's the character that said, "You shouldn't have strangled me, Doctor," and you know what?
Yeah,
I agree with you.
What?
I love how the Doctor is attempting to frame it like, "Perry, what are you talking about? You're crazy. I'm fine, Doctor. You just tried to strangle me. Yeah, and lay off me."
It's gaslighting. That's what it is.
It's not even gaslighting. He's not trying to convince her it didn't happen. He's saying, "Yeah, it happened. Accept me for who I am."
Yeah. Either way, horrendous.
Yeah, they spend way too long on the diamond
Yeah.
heist.
Which
It's another instance of a big plot letting you get to know these characters only for them to all be killed very quickly for no
and it's not
real
even
reason, making you think, well, what
yeah,
was all the
like
point of the
that
setup
one
then?
bit where the Cryon hands Griffiths the diamonds, and Lytton's like, diamonds are common on Telos. Well, here's the thing. Why would you need that financial incentive for Griffiths to want to leave? He clearly doesn't want to be on Telos for much longer. So
Yeah,
surely,
exactly.
I mean, yes, he obviously doesn't want to join Lytton in his bullshittery, which fair enough, because Lytton's just an asshole who's trying to manipulate a lot of the
Yeah,
situation. But like, he wants to get
but
home,
I don't know.
sure.
Like if yeah, I was gonna say if that guy was like, I can get you home, I probably wouldn't need much more incentive if
Yeah,
I didn't like the
exactly.
guy. I'd
Like,
probably go,
so,
yeah, all right then,
but he
let's
just
do
says,
it.
yeah, well, will I ever live to spend it? I mean, well, he won't, but like, it's still there for some reason, because he's a professional like Lytton, and they've been hired to do something. I don't. And here's the thing, Cuff. As I said, I remember actually quite enjoying this episode a lot when I was a kid. I really did. I like the bit with the Cryons. I like the weird, wacky um, turns of events. I didn't even mind the bitterness of that ending. But honestly, having discussed it with you over this last hour, I'm realizing, yeah, this is a bad episode. This is plain and simple.
Because like it's all well and good to have a bittersweet ending, but what purpose does it
Yeah,
serve in the
it doesn't
story?
really do anything.
It serves as a way to redeem a character who before this point didn't need
Yeah,
redeeming, wasn't in a place where they could have been redeemed, and in fact the only reason they got the redemption is because of something
and
that was brought up in this episode. So you don't need
and
it, and it doesn't serve any narrative in terms of the Cybermen and the actual A story with Mondas and
yeah,
Telos and all that stuff. It doesn't play into that
yeah.
either. It's just something that's
It's just
there, just like
yeah.
this entire hour and a
It
half
reminds me of
runtime.
something that Perry said when she says, "Oh, doctor, it feels like your mind has just been processed and put through the meat grinder." Well, you know what? That's what this episode is. It's a bunch of weird, wacky ideas that have been stitched together, put into a meat grinder, and there's just been chunks that have just been blowing out all over the walls, and then they've been sitting there and thinking, "Oh, I wonder what'll stick." And as it turns out, as I said, not much. That's basically what this
And
episode
look, I
is.
mentioned I mentioned that I dislike this more than Legend of the Sea Devils, and I could see you about to be like, well, but Legend of the Sea Devils was worse because this. I'll put it this way. At least with Legend of the Sea Devils, it was only 50 minutes of stuff I didn't like. This was an hour and a
Yeah,
half.
fair enough.
It annoyed me for
Hmm.
longer. Even it. I'll say that Legend of the Sea Devils probably has a lot more that's wrong with
On a
it.
technical level,
Like
yeah.
there's probably there's a lot more elements of it that you can go,
Hmm.
well, I dislike this for
Hmm.
more reasons than I
Hmm.
dislike this episode. But like purely on a fundamental level, at the very least, I can understand what they were trying to do
Hmm.
with Legend of the Sea Devils. They were trying to, bring back a classic monster, tie it into uh, the Doctor Yaz arc.
Hmm.
It didn't work at all,
Yeah.
but they tried. Here, the only reason this episode exists is nostalgia
Hmm.
baiting and trying and using that and that alone to try and win back some of the goodwill they had from the end of the Fifth
Hmm.
Doctor era. And the fact that they chose all the wrong ways to try and win back that goodwill, as well as actively say to everyone who disliked the Sixth Doctor's characterization from Twin Dilemma, no, you're wrong, this is how
Hmm.
he is now. And then to bore me with an hour and a half
Yeah.
of nothing,
Yeah. It's
yeah,
that gut level where you feel like
bad.
there's clearly something wrong here. I don't know. I may not know exactly what it is yet, but Jesus, this just feels so bad. So,
And the fact that they involve the
hmm.
Cybermen in it, like they're my
Yeah.
favorite Doctor Who recurring villain. Don't drag them down to your level. Do it with the Sontarans. They haven't been in it for a
Hmm.
while. No one cared about them in the mid
Oh,
'80s.
I can't
Just
wait.
chuck
I
them in,
can't
and
wait
we'll
for
see how they
when we
fare.
watch the Two Doctors, because there's a Sontaran in
Oh yeah, that
it.
mess.
So, yeah, I think it again, it kind of goes back to what I said before about certain types of stories. Doctor Who, again, it's standard classic sort of storytelling. The plot's the most important thing. You have characters, they have goals, they're trying to get to those goals, they have obstacles and all this stuff. And it's just failing on those levels to try and bring that about, because again, I'm not even against kind of experimental endings that are really better and don't seem to have a solid conclusion. And what I mean by that is that they don't even have to have any kind of emotional satisfaction. It can just be it's just the ending. I'm completely comfortable with that. But here's the thing: this is not like a movie from New American cinema in the 70s. Yeah, this is not Mean Streets. This is not The French Connection. Okay, this is Doctor Who, and in Doctor Who, they're meant to be doing again a very specific type of story. And if you're going to try and take these risks, if you're going to try and do something that's quite different and edgy or whatever you want to call it, you need to still work it within the framework of this sort of classic form of storytelling. And it's so clear that they're just failing to do that. Because they could have done the bittersweet ending, as you mentioned, but they just didn't even really attempt to make it come right in the end. So what was the point? So yeah.
Yeah, they needed that resolution with Perry.
Yeah.
If they were going to have the
That
Doctor
that might have
question
redeemed
his judgment, they
that
needed it
might have
to
redeemed the
affect
episode a fair
something.
bit, but again, they didn't even try to do it. It's just, I misjudged Lytton. Goodbye, folks.
Yep. Thank God all the Lytton fans have been satisfied. We've heard all the people saying, justice for Lytton, justice for Lytton. Well, here you go. Enjoy the new season.
And again, maybe I'm nitpicking here, but when the Doctor is talking to Payne when they're in the sewers and they've got him captive, he mentions Lytton. He's like, Lytton? The kind of, unscrupulous guy who would kill his own mother just to keep his trigger finger supple. Like, how do you know it's that Lytton, Doctor? How do you know it's him? Like, you are a traveler in time and space. You, like, I understand that, there's a lot of weird little coinky dinks in Doctor Who, but, like, do you know for a fact that it's the same character there? Like, does that make sense? And I don't know, Cuff, maybe you feel differently about it, but for me, even if it is a nitpick, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me that they'd put that in there. So, again, it's clearly just a case of, nostalgia bait. Remember Lytton? Remember that lovable rogue? Well, he's back and he's doing something. So...
And thank God he finally got the ending he deserved. He was redeemed in the Doctor's eyes, and we all know that was the main thing that's been holding Doctor Who back since Resurrection of the Daleks. That was the main thing that the fans were saying that was wrong with the show, is that Lytton didn't get his ending that was right for the character. Lytton didn't get redeemed. Well, here you go, guys. Doctor Who is fixed. Lytton is redeemed.
Congrats. This is bad. This is really
2 out of 10.
This is really, really, really bad. Here's the thing, Cuff. When I started this episode, I thought, maybe like a 5 out of 10, because like half of it is kind of good.
God,
I thought,
have I really dragged you that low?
Think maybe 4 out of 10, because it's like, that's what you gave Legend of the Sea Devils, and it's like kind of that bad. But somehow now, I'm probably going to give it a 3. Because again,
wow.
there are bits of it that I enjoyed, and I like the second episode a lot more than 2, and maybe even now my nostalgia goggles are on too tight, but yes, I'm going to give it a 3.
It's a solid 2 for me. This is tripe.
Man, I'm so glad we decided to talk about this episode, Cuff. I think this is definitely the first time we've had an episode that we've hated this much, but
yeah,
for that reason, I'm sure it's going to be entertaining when this airs, but...
Well, I mean, we did both dislike Legend of the Sea Devils as well, but this is a very different kind of hate. Yeah. This is something that I think on some levels, Legend of the Sea Devils is probably worse than this.
But the overall impact.
But I think it's mainly... Yeah, well, it's mainly because, like, the one thing... Something that you've been saying a lot about the classic series and why you love it so much is because, for all of its... For all of the elements that haven't aged that well about it, you can tell that at the core they're really trying to do something different. There's some passion there. And I can't see any of that in this story.
It's almost...
At which point I'm left with all the Doctor Who isms that don't quite
Yeah.
hold up as much, and they're more pronounced.
And yeah, as you say, there's nothing to sort of really support it. There's nothing underneath it. In fact, you could even say that when you combine the really intense bitterness of the ending with the really nasty characterization of the Doctor and the horrendous nostalgia bait that just gets chucked in here, left, right, and center, it seems cynical. It's like a really cynical Doctor Who story, which, as I kind of hinted at before, I mean, that's a very 80s thing to do, I think, but like, did they have to give in to that trend? Did they really have to do it? Like, this could have been. Well, here's the thing. I want to say this could have been a good episode, but there's really not much in it that's redeemable. So I don't, apart from the Cryons, I don't know what the fuck they were going to do with it. So
Yeah. Well, all you needed to do is, you know, do chuck out the B story and the C story and everything like that. You don't need Lytton. You just have the Doctor being steered off course by the Time Lords. You know, the Cybermen are about to change history.
yeah,
Bloody stop them. They arrive on Talos, and then, you know, they do their whole thing. Perry's still doubting the Doctor. Maybe they get separated. The Cryons do their thing. The Cybermen are about to invade. Maybe Perry does something that redeems her in the Doctor's eyes, and the Doctor goes, "I'm sorry for how I treated you."
Or at least something happens. Maybe something major happens, where the Doctor realizes, oh, I've actually been a really repulsive person over the last while. Maybe I should, not be that way. And you mentioned the thing about the Time Lords. Again, one of the bits in the episode that I really liked was when the Doctor realizes that the Time Lords have basically manipulated him into this situation. But the thing is, you could have still done that even if the main setup was the Time Lords manipulating the Doctor. You could have had it be a twist. You could have had it so, like, the Doctor finds this signal, goes off to tell us, but then it's revealed, oh, the Time Lords fixed it all up. So you still could have done that. One of the few bits of the episode that I liked, you could have still made it work, but they didn't. So, yeah, I don't think there's much more to say about it. It's just this is a bad episode of Doctor Who. It's a bad classic episode. It's a bad episode compared to the rival series. It's just a bad episode. So,
it might also be one of the biggest discrepancies we've had with the timescales. This episode was a 6.7 average rating, if you'll recall.
What? Like, yeah. Again, now that we've discussed it on reflection, that's just not true. That is false. This is not a good episode. This is not a 6. Okay, The Leisure Hive is a 6. Okay, that's flawed but fun, and enjoyable. This is just mean-spirited, cynical, sloppy, and it's just bad. It is a bad episode. So there you are.
And if you're looking for some tonal whiplash, join us next week when we'll be reviewing Dalek, one of the first properly well-regarded universally stories of the revived era. Stories. Oh man, if you're listening to these back to back in like weeks after we've recorded this, and you want to go from how basically low energy we are now to then like that buzz you get when you're discussing something that you just absolutely adore, get ready for that, because I'm sure we'll do that.
Yep, I don't doubt it.
Until then, I'm Alex.
I'm feeling sad inside.
And until next time, please put more effort into your pursuits than the makers of Attack of the Cybermen put into this.
Yes, please do.